3, 2, 1.
Hey everyone, Moms Against Medical Bullying. So in today's video, I'm just going to read snippets from the book Bechamp or Pasteur, a Lost Chapter in the History of Biology. And I'm going to be reading from chapter 14, which is called Modern Conformations of Bechamp. Now, it's going to be a long video, about 20 minutes long. If you can, stick with me. It does get a little better towards the middle. All right, everyone, enjoy. So when I read this chapter 14, I became very excited because in this chapter, she talks a lot about how Bechamp's findings were and have been confirmed. That the cell isn't necessarily the smallest unit of life, that there are smaller particles that make up the cell. These particles have been called different names by different scientists. So some examples are little bodies. I think Bechamp called them little bodies as well. Microzymas, which is what Bechamp called them. I think somatids is was that rife? Somatids was what I think is what another scientist calls them. I remember Amanda Vollmer talking about that. Infinitesimal elements that survive destruction. Dun dun. Biococcus, chromatinic germs, chromatinic particles, chromatin threads, chromatin, molecular granules, coccus, monas crepusculum, monas crepusculum. So, and what's so exciting about this is that these particles apparently are immortal. They do not die. They might be, hold on a sec. They might go dormant, but they do not die. And that's exciting to me because, it just, to me, that reflects God's nature, right? His immortal life. And, who he is infiltrates everything. So that, to me, that's kind of like one of those examples of science kind of, not that God needs to be confirmed, but kind of like confirming that immortal life. Let's see here. So I'm going to read a little bit here from the book as well. Professor Bechamp and Esther, while working together, saw the granules, the microzymas, in cells associate and thread-like forms develop. There seems little doubt that all these years ago, they were already observing different stages in that complicated series of changes known as karyokinesis or mitosis, which occur in the division of the cell nucleus, in which is effected an equal division of the substance of the nucleus of the parent cell into two resultant nuclei. This process, the chief phenomena of the cleavage of the cell, is the driving force of the cell multiplication that is responsible for the growth of the bodies of all living beings. According to the most popular modern view, it is affected by the granules, which, on uniting, are known as chromatin threads, the name chromatin being applied to their substance because of the deeper shade it takes when stained for observation under the microscope. The early axiom of Bechamp's that minute living granules build up cells holds good today, more than a half century later, regardless of nomenclature. Indeed, when we come to names, the number and variety in use are sufficient to befog any clarity in the matter, and it is certainly unfortunate that general use has not been made of Bechamp's term, which is microzyma. In regard to Bechamp's priority in demonstrating the role of the granulations and the subsequent confusion of the terminology, we quote M. Nenke, a Swiss professor. Quote, "To my knowledge, it is Bechamp who was the first to consider certain molecular granulations, which he named microzymas, to be organized ferments, and he defended his view resolutely against various attacks." Bechamp says, the cell is a collection of little beings which have an independent life, a special natural history. So these are little minute dots that are present in the cell. So dots in the cell is a collection of microzyma or molecular granulation. I'm going to read another quote. "To each such granule must be attributed the fundamental properties of living organisms in general. In the first place, metabolism expressed in continual molecular change, in assimilation, and in growth, with consequent reproduction. In the second place, specific individuality." This was exactly Bechamp's teaching, and moreover, he showed that the microzymas are the transmitters of heredity. According to him, a plant or animal is what it is by virtue of its microzymas. It is by reason of its microzymas that an acorn develops into an oak or a hen's egg into a chicken. Microzymian influence decides the child's likeness to either father or mother. So here's another quote from Bechamp, which is really good. Microzymas are builders of cells, and by evolution become vibrios. They are histologically active. They are producers of zymuses, which are ferments. They are physiologically active and denoting that zymuses are agents endowed with the chemical capacity of transformation or decomposition. It may be said that microzymas can generate chemical energy. It is thanks to the microzymas that we digest and that we are able to transform and assimilate the materials that serve to nourish us. This is fascinating because I think that they're saying that these microzymas produce the bacteria, which I believe are also, they are ferments or zymuses. Yeah, pretty fascinating. It is thanks, okay, I read that already. Thus, they are chemically active and placed in certain artificial surroundings. Under favorable circumstances, they bring about decomposition, that is fermentation. In other words, they nourish themselves while they multiply, regardless of whether they evolve into vibrios or not. They are therefore individually organisms comparable to those we call living and organized ferments. Finally, they defy putrefaction, and if I add that they are not digested in the condition of animal matter where they are, one can say that they are physiologically indestructible. So then she starts talking about Bechamp's view on bacteria coming from these microzyma. So here is confirmation of belief in bacterial evolution from chromatinic, otherwise microzymian granules, further supported by such statements as, quote, I agree with those who derive the bacteria as primitive, truly non-cellular organisms directly from the biococcus, which is Murakowski's term, through an ancestral form. So, yeah. So here's another quote, but you must not imagine that the microzymas are converted into bacteria without any transition. On the contrary, there are many intermediate forms between the microzymas and bacteria. Okay, so microzymas can transform into bacteria. What you must bear in mind is that the medium has a great influence on the appearance of the various forms in their evolution from microzymas, and that there is an infinity of species which vary in their function. Finally, that according to the nature of the medium, microzymas can produce cells in place of bacteria, true cellular microphytes, and molds. It has been argued that modern research has not confirmed Bechamp's statement. Quote, we have seen the microzymas of animal cells associate 2 by 2 or in larger numbers and extend themselves into bacteria. And then she mentions also that Bechamp claimed that bacteria could change their forms from rod shape and pass into spheroid. This was denied by Pasteur. Nonetheless, years later, a worker at the very institute that bears the latter's name has confirmed Bechamp's statement. It was the Daily News of April 8th, 1914, which provides a simple summary. Victor Henry, the lady bacteriologist, has made one of the most important discoveries in that branch of research for many years. She has, by subjecting bacteria to ultraviolet rays, succeeded in creating a new species of bacteria from a species already known. The experiment was made with the anthrax bacillus, which from a rod shape was transformed into a spherical coccus. So far she summarizes that 3 of Bechamp's views have been confirmed in modern science when she was writing this, which is the individualization of the microzyma, the immortality of the microzyma, and now its ability to shift shape into whatever bacteria is necessary for the medium. And she says, the statement that he saw microzymian evolution bring about the formation of primitive organisms, namely bacteria, is at the present day being confirmed by an acknowledged student of his, a French man named Galipe. I think that's how you would pronounce that. Galipe. Galipe accepts Bechamp's term of microzyma for these and calls the manifestations of the biological activity of these intracellular elements microbiosis. These infinitesimal elements may survive the destruction of the cell. So when the cell is destroyed, these things survive. And they may acquire forms and biological properties that they previously did not possess. They may function in a kind of autonomous manner and may adapt themselves to the new conditions in which they find themselves and continue their evolution. All right, so these next 2 couple paragraphs are really interesting. Let's see if we can hang in there. this video is getting a little bit long. So here we go. The most striking example is in war wounds. The crushed tissues in the wounds favor the development of the phenomena due to microbiosis. The danger from leaving these contused tissues in the wounds is recognized now by all surgeons, and the surgical cleansing of all wounds is now routine practice. What they do not know is that on account of the normal parasitism and the microbiosis, the part played by the crushed tissues and the more extravasated blood is at the same time more important and more decisive. They may give birth directly without foreign collaboration to infectious elements so that an absolutely aseptic projectile is capable of infecting a wound solely by its mechanical action and starting the abnormal evolution of the living intracellular elements already present. That was a mouthful. In the Vaccination Inquirer for December 1st, 1920, Mr. Alexander Paul summarizes from the reports of the French Academy of Science the results of other observations by Galipe of living microzymas and their modification into bacilli. Mr. Paul quotes the latter as follows: "Now, the microzymas form an integral part of the cell and cannot confer on the tissues a septic character which they do not themselves possess when they belong to a healthy organism. In spite of some failures, due without doubt to accidental causes, the brilliant results obtained in surgery by the process of grafting are an irrefutable proof of this. The grafts are not dead in the absolute sense of the word, since they contain living elements capable of evolution, or in the midst of appropriate cultures, as demonstrated by our experiments. Neither glycerin, alcohol, nor time destroy the microzymas of the tissues. These different agents can only diminish or suspend their activity. They are endowed with perennial life." So here's another interesting paragraph. Mr. Paul refers to another communication by M. Galipe to the Academy of Science entitled "Living Microorganisms in Paper: Their Resistance to the Action of Heat and of Time." In this, the writer discusses cultivable elements found in all paper, even in ancient Chinese manuscripts and Egyptian papyrus, which have yielded microorganisms endowed with movement. Mr. Paul subsequently quotes Galipe's summary of his research on flowers. Quote, "Reviewing this long series of experiments, the facts that we have set forth show that the living part of the protoplasm is constituted of microzymas." Bechamp's findings have currently been borne out by Dr. J.A. Goodfellow, who writes in his booklet called "Hands Off of Our Milk," quote, "I have recently been investigating the bacteria found in the clay strata beneath the coal measures. Talk about Rip Van Winkle and his century of slumber. These germs have been asleep, according to geologists, for 250 million years. But when I transferred some of them to a suitable liquid medium, they woke up and got busy with as much vigor as if they had only been indulging in 40 winks." This is interesting too. Many who seem to have never heard of Bechamp appear to be working slowly and laboriously toward his views. We may quote, for example, a passage from page 64 of Health, Disease, and Integration, an interesting and advanced work by, okay, I was going to be lazy and not say the names. Okay, Newsholm, medical officer of health for the city of Birmingham. Quote, "Thus, we again reach a position in which, while not negating the role played by an extraneous virus in producing encephalitis lethargica, we nevertheless find reason for not rejecting the possibility that a purely natural enzyme, or V word," this is amazing because when I read this, I was like, OMG. Whenever I read about the V word and also about enzymes, I'm like, wait a minute. I think the V word and enzymes are like the same thing. I don't know. So anyways, that a purely natural enzyme or V word, I'll just say that, produced by the individual. So he's saying we find reason for not rejecting this possibility that this thing could be produced by the individual and not by any bacteria harbored by him or introduced from outside. May on occasion be the cause of particular cases of a syndrome indistinguishable from that arising from extraneous infection. So that's an interesting quote. I'll read another interesting section here. According to the teachings of Bechamp, cells and germs are associations of microzymas. The physical characteristics and vital activities of cells and germs depend upon the soil in which their microzymas feed, grow, and multiply. Thus, microzymas growing in the soil of procreative germ plasm develop into normal, permanent, specialized cells of the living vegetable, animal, or human organism. The same microzymas feeding on morbid materials and systemic poisons in these living bodies develop into bacteria and parasites. How wonderfully the discovery of microzymas confirms the claims of nature cure philosophy, according to which bacteria and parasites cannot cause and instigate inflammatory and other disease processes unless they find their own peculiar morbid soil in which to feed, grow, and multiply. So I'm just going to finish off here by reading some quotes by about Lord Geddes. I don't know who this man is. I'm just reading. It's like so many names in books, right? Okay, so Lord Geddes. He was a fan of Bechamp, apparently. So he described the great contribution Professor Bechamp made, a contribution his lordship had been familiar with for over 30 years, to the whole idea of life, namely that the cell is not the fundamental unit of life, but that there's a much smaller, more minute unit of life. Lord Geddes showed how these living bodies have the power of organizing life, and suggested that as they are not present in artificial chemical manures, the German school, which we have in this country largely followed in biology for many years, overlooked something of great importance, something that may be necessary for our human bodies, if they are to maintain their full vitality by receiving in their food a continuous supply of the little living bodies. Lord Geddes emphasized that there is a real divergence of opinion between two schools which have existed for a long time, one of which has become dominant, out of whose practice and beliefs the whole of the chemical industry has arisen, and has been able to show results of the most remarkable kind in boosting production and plants' growth and those portions of the food that are required as fuels. But he suggested that the composters had got hold of the real source of vitality. The little bodies could be seen in drops of blood under a microscope, and during the course of that week he examined a great many and had seen most extraordinary differences between people fed in different ways and in different states of health. He proposed that the research that was needed was investigation of the question, is the supply of these little living bodies in the food essential to the continued vitality of human beings, or is it not? So I'm going to end the video here. That's 21 minutes. If you guys stuck with me the whole time, bravo. I don't claim to understand every single thing, but just the fact that finding these particles that are immortal, I think that's pretty fascinating, that they're indestructible, pretty cool. All right, everyone, if you have any comments about this, share it down below.